Minerva presents. Greetings, book lovers, and get ready for a literary adventure that will ignite your imagination. Join me as we traverse the captivating landscapes of A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. I pour my heart and soul into creating content that entertains and informs you. If you appreciate my efforts, show some love by liking this video and subscribing following my channel. And if you have any suggestions or ideas, leave a comment below. I value your input. Chapter 1. In a green hunting cap, tweed trousers, plaid shirt, muffler, and desert boots, Ignatius J really stands out in the crowd in front of D.H. Holmes. His hauntingly large eyes, one yellow and one blue, show scorn for a world void of mythology and geometry and a rich inner life. Ignatius's mother has again been keeping him waiting after he has completed his shopping. A police officer demands to see Ignatius's identification and is met with a diatribe about harassment. A crowd forms. Irene really is inside, shopping for pastries and complaining about arthritis to the clerk. She would soak her elbow in hot water, but Ignatius is always in the tub. He has no prospects. In the mob, an old man, Claude Robichaud, defends Ignatius, screaming, "Communist!" The officer turns to Claude, whom Ignatius blames for the uproar. In frustration, the officer takes Claude into custody, and the Reillys slip away. Irene frets that had they not escaped, they would have been dishonored in the newspapers. The Reillys enter the dark, empty night of joy, bar, and Ignatius recoils at the smell. Ignatius breaks into his familiar lament about the trauma of taking a bus on his only trip outside New Orleans, to Baton Rouge. Irene is glad Ignatius did not take a job in the medieval culture department. Ignatius wants to escape the horrid bar, but Irene orders another round of drinks. Among the shoplifters in the precinct, Claude meets Jones, a young black man wearing sunglasses and blowing cigarette smoke. Jones says the police are throwing everyone in jail, blacks in particular. Claude says his only fault was calling an officer a communist. Jones hoots he would be in Angola if he did that. Someone stole cashews at Woolworths and the police grabbed him. Jones seems resigned to being framed and sent up for life. Before the desk sergeant, Angelo Mancuso explains he stopped a big, fat, suspicious-looking character, possibly a pervert, in a green hat who escaped with his mother when Claude got in the way. The sergeant releases Claude to his daughter's custody. Tourists and conventioneers fill Bourbon Street at twilight, but few enter the night of joy. Irene wants to leave, but Ignatius wants to observe corruption. They meet dandy Dorian Green, who argues with Ignatius. Irene intervenes, telling Dorian of their trouble with the police, while Ignatius tells his bus story to Darlene, a blonde sitting at the bar. Irene admires Dorian's attire, and he admires her hat, which he buys for $15. Dorian leaves, and Irene tries to pry Ignatius away from Darlene. Irene tells Darlene that Ignatius graduated smart after 8 years in college on the money Grandma left. Now he just watches television. Darlene takes Irene's side and tries to push Ignatius off his stool. Statuesque Lana Lee asks what is going on and orders the Reillys out. Ignatius remarks Lana that looks like a Nazi and threatens to sue over the $8 bar tab, but Irene pays from proceeds from her hat sale. As the Reillys wobble down the street, Ignatius complains that mother sold a hat, certainly for degenerate uses. Ignatius wants to buy hot dogs from a corner vendor, but Irene refuses. Bums run these wagons. They find their 1946 Plymouth. Ignatius slumps into the safe back seat, and he begins criticizing Irene's driving. Irene lurches the car into a building whose balcony collapses. Ignatius says the building's owner must have been hoping someone would demolish it to collect damages. His digestion destroyed, Ignatius vomits down the side of the car. Mancuso happens by, disguised in ballet tights and a yellow sweater, in search of bona fide suspicious characters. If he fails, he will be off the force. Mancuso stopped a young man in a lady's hat, but the culprit slapped him and escaped. Still smarting from the slap, he sees the green hat vomiting. Ignatius compliments himself on the wisdom of his latest jottings about the breakdown of the medieval system. Someday, the doodles that cover his floor will be edited into a magnificent comparative history. Examining his bloated abdomen, Ignatius contemplates how concerns over society cause his pyloric valve to snap shut, filling his stomach painfully with gas. Ignatius believes in the Road of Fortune's Wheel of Fortune, central to Boethius' The Consolation of Philosophy. Luck, Boethius teaches, comes in cycles and Ignatius is spinning downward. The car accident is a bad sign, and Ignatius prays that Fortuna will not crush him. Through the door, Irene asks for a Hail Mary for her upcoming meeting with Mancuso. She is happy, Ignatius is praying, but wonders why he is always locked in his room. Ignatius bounces on his side to free a gas bubble, and the action produces a tiny erection, which Ignatius relieves mechanically, picturing his beloved boyhood dog, Rex. Jones asks Lana for the advertised job of porter. The police threaten jail unless he is gainfully employed. Lana wants no police involvement, but can find no one willing to work for $20 a week. Darlene arrives gracefully, but late, and explains her cockatoo had to go to the vet. Lana demands to know why Darlene had encouraged the Reillys last night. Such people destroy business. Darlene is to show Jones around while Lana goes shopping, and both are to stay away from the underbar cabinet. Darlene has been practicing to be an exotic dancer. She tells Jones about the man in a green hat, sitting with his mother. Jones makes the mental connection. In t-shirt, shorts, and false red beard, Mancuso arrives on crumbling Constantinople Street and pulls up before the smallest house on the block, marked by a dying banana tree, a plywood Celtic cross, and a damaged 1946 Plymouth. Neighbors watch from their porches. Over coffee in the dark, dank, primitive kitchen, Mancuso reports the building owner wants $10-20 in restitution. Irene explains Ignatius ranting as he watches television shows that he despises but refuses to miss. Mancuso is heartbroken at Irene's plight, but he feels helpless. Irene figures she can mortgage the house. Ignatius rumbles into the kitchen and reacts coldly to Mancuso's presence. Ignatius rejects mortgaging the house and declines to help find a solution. The United States, he dogmatizes, is on the edge of the abyss, in need of taste and decency, theology and geometry. Irene asks what to do with such an uncaring boy. Irene offers Mancuso some wine, which soothes her when she has the blues. Mancuso tells her about his dangerous job and domestic troubles, married to a woman with bad nerves. He bowls to avoid drinking and suggests Irene join him and his aunt to make friends outside the house. Ignatius returns, demanding dinner swiftly, lest he be late for the movie. Ignatius flaps off to his room to doodle for 30 minutes, and admits his mother only after she begins throwing herself against his door. Irene is shocked by the clutter and smell, but Ignatius resumes his attack on Mancuso's intrusion into his family. Mancuso will arrange for installment payments, Irene says. Ignatius thunders at Irene's treading on his notebooks and drinking, but this time Irene is resolute. Tomorrow they will search the want ads. Irene will dress Ignatius appropriately, and he will not return without a job. Ignatius reminds Irene of how he failed as a library clerk, his only post-college job. Irene reminds him that he also taught a class at college, but Ignatius recalls how his students demonstrated outside his window. He dumped their ungraded papers on them, and the dean fired him. Irene had not heard this story. Ignatius wishes Myrna Minkoff could see him going to work. Myrna is in her native New York, doubtlessly taunting the police and playing guitar. Irene regrets spending so much on Ignatius's schooling only to have him fall in with such a woman. But she still thinks if they had married and had a baby, they might have settled down. Ignatius declares such talk obscenity and filth, and again demands dinner. They will study the want ads in the morning. Irene is proud of Ignatius and kisses him emotionally. On a bus, Jones laughs about a nervous old woman who probably thinks he wants to rape her just because he is black. He wonders where the green cap will appear next. Jones observes a man with a rolled-up newspaper beating another man in a red beard and wearing shorts. That one looks familiar, and Jones is uncomfortable having two unidentified people wandering his world. Jones wants to look like the men in Life magazine aides, cool and rich. When Fortuna spins downward, go to a movie, Ignatius believes, and he attends them almost every night. Taking up 2 seats near the screen, Ignatius is well stocked with snacks. Ignatius relishes seeing and hearing things that offend him and sporadically screams critiques at the screen. The manager, who tries to silence Ignatius, agrees with the candy woman's claim that Ignatius is worse than ever on this night. Chapter 3. Ignatius's only interview results in a closed valve. There are plenty of jobs available, Irene states, but Ignatius resents such optimism, doubtless derived from her Svengali, Mancuso. Ignatius sees humankind as destined to misery. Ignatius rejects a job requiring quiet, hard work, and another requiring a start time between 8 and 9 am. Irene demands he answer the levy pants ad. To get Mancuso to stop bothering his mother, Ignatius suggests he investigate the Night of Joy, where they fell prey to a bee-girl and a Nazi. Mancuso takes the lead to his sergeant, but is dispatched to the streets disguised as a soldier while detectives stake out the bar. The sergeant is determined that Mancuso get no credit for any arrests. As he has for 20 years, office manager Gonzalez is first to arrive at Levy Pants. The owner, Gus Levy, rarely visits and is concerned only about attending sports events. The only other long-term employee is the octogenarian assistant accountant, Miss Trixie. Mrs. Levy demands Trixie be retained no matter what. Gonzalez takes pride in the order of his desk, which stands in contrast to Trixie's adjacent roll top, which seems to attract debris magnetically. Trixie hoards the telephone books. Trixie shuffles in, carrying a new assortment of items in a paper bag, and heads straight to the ladies' room, ignoring Gonzalez's greeting. Gonzalez wonders how many other workers will appear. The spring-summer line is due to begin shipping, and Gonzalez needs help. In walks the largest man Gonzalez has ever seen, and he prays this is an applicant. Ignatius instantly dislikes Gonzalez, but when Trixie bumbles in, Ignatius warms, and feeling his valve opening, he resolves to accept the job. Gonzalez assures Ignatius that this is a wonderful place to work. He introduces a sleeping Trixie who declares Ignatius a fine, well-fed big boy and begins complaining that she wants to retire, but they will not let her. Learning pay for the filing job is a mere $60 a week, and Ignatius says this is lower than other positions he is considering. Gonzalez throws in $20 a day for car fare, which is enough to convince Ignatius to begin a trial period. Lana demands that Jones remove his sunglasses to see what he is doing, but for $20 a week, he refuses. Lana warns there are many people who could take his job. Only other vagrants, he counters. Lana holds over Jones, her ability to report him to the police, and he counters with a threat to gather proof the bar is a cat house and turn her in. Jones likes Darlene and admires her goal of entering show business. A young, oily-haired boy bangs through the door and hands Lana some cash. They talk secretively about whether the orphans liked the new merchandise. George figures Jones is a junkie, and Jones postures threateningly. Lana separates them and hands George a package from beneath the bar. They wink at each other and George leaves. Rejecting Jones' insinuations about the dubious orphans, Lana returns to the new revenue. Riding a taxi home, Ignatius writes about his fatiguing first day. Gonzalez is a pleasant, apprehensive, courteous cretin. Trixie, whom Mrs. Levy demands Gonzalez treat well and make to feel active and wanted, has many insights and observations. Gonzalez fired Gloria, a brazen stenographer. Ignatius has plans for the filing department and the company at large. Fortuna has taken an inner upcycle within the larger bad cycle. Arriving home, Ignatius is dismayed to see his mother dressed like a starlet from Gold Diggers. She has been attending Miss Annie, who fainted when Ignatius's lute playing overpowered her nerves. Irene stopped at Lenny's to buy Annie some beads, and Ignatius snorts at dealing in religious goods. Ignatius tells about his first day at Levy Pants as Irene weeps with pride, but the salary disappoints her. Irene announces she is off bowling, which throws Ignatius into a fury, but he is diverted by news that he received a letter from Myrna in New York. On the back of an outdated calendar, Marina responds to Ignatius' frightening letter about near arrest and the car accident. There is not enough information for her to contact the Civil Liberties Union. Myrna is worried about Ignatius's paranoia with homosexual tendencies. Ignatius must identify with some meaningful social movement, purify his mind and body through therapeutic sex, or face the psychiatric hospital. Myrna and her friends are planning a bold film about interracial marriage. They have lined up actors but need someone to play the landlord. Ignatius would be perfect, and visiting her in New York would help him cut the umbilical cord. They must begin soon because Myrna has bled her father dry and the leading lady is demanding a salary. Ignatius burns the letter, mumbling his determination to show this offensive troll-up. Chapter 4. A week into the job, Ignatius has lettered a sign proclaiming his proprietorship of the file cabinets. Gonzalez wonders when Ignatius might begin dealing with the filing backlog. Ignatius thinks it best not to risk plague by interfering with a large rat devouring the Abelman's dry goods folder, and his misbehaving valve prevents him from reaching the lower drawers. The tiny, wheeled stool Gonzalez produces collapses under Ignatius's weight. Determined to right Gloria, as she calls Ignatius, Trixie topples onto Ignatius just as Gus Levy arrives to collect his mail. Gonzalez introduces the owner to his bright new employee. Ignatius declares he has an unusual interest in Levy's firm and has many innovations in mind. Gonzalez asks Levy to sign a letter he has drafted to the troublesome Abelman's dry goods, crooks demanding redress for a defective shipment. Levy tells Gonzalez to sign as usual. Ignatius watches Gonzalez forge Gus Levy, and while Gonzalez is in the factory, he types a disjointed, threatening, and insulting letter to Mr. I, Abelman Mongoloid, Esquire, and copies Levy's signature. Back in his own area, Ignatius throws a stack of materials into a wastebasket. At the bar, Jones asks Lana whether the fat mother in the green cap has been back and muses about the interest the police would take in her orphans. Lana has bigger problems. Darlene wants to dance, Jones wants a raise, and because plainclothesmen are hanging around, business stinks. Lana suspects Jones put the police onto her. If not Jones, who? Ignatius's employment brings peace to the Reilly home. Irene remembers the horrible night she and her late husband conceived Ignatius after a movie. Santa Battaglia phones to report the police are arresting Angelo Mancuso. She learned that from an old man who, Santa thinks, has his eye on Irene. Irene switches to news about Ignatius's job. Ignatius wants her to be home more. Santa insists they will pick her up at 7 p.m. Irene asks Santa to find out who the old man is. Beverly Lodge overlooks the bay. Outwardly, it is elegantly rustic. Inside, foam seating, nylon carpets, and mood lighting rule in a constantly controlled, purified atmosphere. Mrs. Levi's life revolves around her sensual, motorized exercise board. The couple sits before a television set that cannot hold its color and resume their standard argument involving 1. The exercise board, 2. Whether Gus has thrown his father's business down the drain or it is simply outdated and ready for sale. 3. Whether his late father was a successful visionary or a mean, cheap tyrant who drained Gus of interest in the company. 4. Whether Gus lets down daughters Susan and Sandra as a father or is supporting their wildlife at college. And 5. Trixie. Mrs. Levy maintains retirement will kill her, and she is a candidate for psychic rejuvenation. Gus refuses to bring Trixie home to be worked on and relates the odd behavior he observed today in the office. Ignatius examines a pile of articles, written but never submitted for publication. A new project has suggested itself, the Journal of a Working Boy, or Up from Sloth. Ignatius begins by informing the reader that he has grown accustomed to the hectic pace and has initiated work, saving methods. The company's lord and master will soon learn of Ignatius's devotion to his firm. Trixie's apathy is a facade for resentment against Levy Pants. She is coherent only when talking about retirement. When Ignatius's valve adapts to the tension of the working world, he intends to investigate the factory inferno. In a social note, Ignatius rails against tasteless, indecent, perverse, and blasphemous films, along with mothers bowling with depraved undesirables, which causes him domestic pain. In a health note, Ignatius reports his valve sealed violently when he was asked to add a column of figures. He signs himself Daryl, your working boy. Satisfied with his journal entry, Ignatius puts off penning a slashing attack on Myrna's being and worldview until he has visited the factory. His leadership of the workers will make that offensive minx look like a reactionary. Ignatius plucks at his lute and begins to sing, but Annie screams at him to shut up. Before he can retaliate, Ignatius hears Irene and Mancuso drive up. He finds Irene animated, Mancuso morose, and Mancuso's Aunt Santa doing a provocative dance. Chapter 5. After reading about arrests in a nearby bar, Lana warns Darlene against talking with plainclothesmen. A customer in bowling shoes propositioned a woman there, but he escaped the melee. Darlene suggests it would be safer for business to let her dance on stage. Lana orders her to be quiet and forbids her to tell Jones there are police in the bar every night, lest he panic and quit. Darlene suggests an animal mascot, like other clubs. Darlene has a smart cockatoo, which is part of her smashing dance act. Jones, who has been kept out of the conversation, announces George's arrival, and Lana leads George out to the street, where it is safe to talk. She does not trust Jones, but cannot trust Jones, but cannot afford to replace him. George must limit his visits to the bar to the half-hour Jones is at lunch. He can stash his packages in the bus station if he does not want to carry them around until 3 p.m. When Lana re-enters the bar, Darlene re-enters the bar. Darlene resumes promoting her bird act, and Lana gives in. Gonzalez considers how Ignatius has improved life at Levy Pants. He is 4 workers in one, is kind to Trixie, and has decorated the office. Ignatius's first priority today is to paint a large cross. Trixie arrives halfway through Ignatius's lunch, enjoys a sandwich and a half, and drops the soggy remnants on Gonzalez's desk, ruining a bank statement due that day. Ignatius defends her against the office manager and is disappointed when a full-fledged battle fizzles. Ignatius finishes his cross, dumps his filing backlog in a trash can, adds the contents of a file drawer to the refuse, and lumbers off to the factory to promote social justice. Mancuso's head is bandaged as he reports to his angry sergeant. He was injured moonlighting after an evening bowling with his aunt. The sergeant accuses Mancuso of giving them a phony lead about the night of joy and assigns him to restroom duty at the bus station until he brings someone in. Today, Mancuso will pose as a farmer. Ignatius hears the familiar sounds of his mother preparing to leave the house. Readying to begin a new journal entry, Ignatius tries not to kiss her goodbye, but relents and is aghast at her appearance. They argue about Irene's friends and money until car honks interrupt. From his window, Ignatius aims a bottle of ink at the white rambler and begins to bring his dear reader up to date. Banish, benefit, and beautify are the 3 B's of his program. Without the dictatorial manager, Ignatius and Trixie would be content. The sweatshop factory is compelling and repelling. It mechanizes slavery. Ignatius provides a long aside on watermelons, civil rights organizations, the polluted Mississippi as Ursat's father figure, Mark Twain, Baton Rouge, and the comforts of apathetic, stagnant New Orleans. The barn-like factory reminds Ignatius of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Production is far below capacity, and morale is a problem. The foreman, Mr. Palermo, drinks on and off duty. Offended by the obscene jazz to which the workers listen and dance, Ignatius switches off the radio, but acknowledging poor judgment, restores it and demonstrates his dancing prowess to win the workers' confidence. They respond appreciatively until his knees give out and show concern helping him up. Ignatius feels kinship with the colored race, but cannot understand why they want to join the bourgeoisie, which will be their ruin. He admires the terror blacks inspire in the white proletariat simply by being themselves, and he imagines himself as a large and terrifying Negro. Apologizing to the reader for the digression, Ignatius continues. The workers are non-committal about their work. Ignatius parries their personal questions. Taking home less than $30 a week, they would perhaps be better off composing jazz, creating new dances, or pursuing other innate talents. Ignatius is irate on their behalf. In another aside, Ignatius recalls first meeting, as a graduate student, loud, offensive Mirnai Minkoff. She is in college on money chiseled from her father. After their first traumatic meeting, at which Myrna prides herself on being actively engaged in society while Ignatius is disengaged, they begin a masochistic affair. Marina fails to seduce Ignatius, but campus rumor links them in depravity. Sex is Myrna's cure, all, and 2 girls who fall under her influence come to tragedy. Nearly raped by a janitor and ignoring Ignatius's efforts to lead her to the path of truth, Myrna leaves college declaring it cannot teach her anything she does not know. She and Ignatius meet several times during her inspection tours of the South, and they correspond regularly. Ignatius may someday accept her invitations to visit Manhattan. Tomorrow Gonzalez will fall, and civil rights organizations will laud Ignatius' leadership. He will report that to Myrna. Sarcastic Dr. Toss ransacks his desk, hunting notes for tomorrow's lecture. Toss manages by glibness to conceal his ignorance. In a stack of unreturned student essays dating back 5 years, Toss finds a page printed in red crayon demanding that he suffer the death penalty for his total ignorance. Soon, all will know Toss is a total ass. Talk wonders what has become of Zorro. Chapter 6. Mr. Watson owns Maddie's Ramble Inn, a combination bar and grocery. Jones sits on a stool complaining. Watson advises Jones to behave and be nice, which sounds like Laura's line. Jones is sure Laura has a high connection on the police force and is up to something crooked. He is watching for an opportunity to escape modern slavery and become somebody and owning things. Jones wishes his washwoman mother could have sent him to college like Watson did his schoolteacher's son, but he spent his time on the streets, rolling tires around. Watson advises Jones to try sabotage. Another patron says co-workers at Levy Pants are planning a big sabotage tomorrow, led by some big, smart, and religious white man. When the stranger mentions a green hat, Jones says the police are looking for that freak. The stranger worried about going to jail. Gonzalez notices new crepe paper streamers and wonders how Ignatius does his filing without disturbing the vines growing down the front of the cabinets. Ignatius bursts in carrying a cheap movie camera and rolled-up bedsheet. Early and paranoid, Ignatius heads straight to the factory door. Gonzalez hears a cheer. 4 workers hoist Ignatius, frantic about being dropped, onto a cutting table to supervise. The workers laughingly display the various engines of war Ignatius ordered they bring. One man asks whether Ignatius is in trouble with the police, which makes the workers uneasy. Ignatius declares it vile slander, but wonders how they learned about Mancuso's attempt to arrest him. Ignatius whips open the yellow-stained sheet to reveal Forward and Crusade for Moorish Dignity, lettered in crayon. Ignatius cows 2 statuesque women into bearing the standard and begins filming a documentary, directing the workers to wave sticks and stones menacingly, make faces, scream, and jump. After filming a bit, Ignatius asks a worker to shoot him, scowling and shaking his fist. Ignatius announces the order of the march, banner, choir, and warriors battalion. They must proceed peacefully and rationally. They will gather around the cross. If Gonzalez fails to respond, Ignatius will call for attack. The force moves out rapidly, leaving Ignatius stranded on the table. Eventually, he risks jumping the few inches to the floor, but lands awkwardly, and the camera cracks open, exposing the film. Ignatius rails at the insipid song selection. Gonzalez looks confused. When Ignatius orders the attack, people demand Gonzalez be given an opportunity to speak. The army disbands, grumbling about the police. Looking Ignatius. They have enough trouble without going to jail. Mancuso completes his 8 hours without making an arrest, but does catch a cold, gets stuck in the restroom, and can only call for help. Ignatius growls at Irene as she berates him for being fired. She mocks his declaration that it is all Myrna's fault and demands Ignatius return to the want ads. Ignoring Irene's adamancy about a new job search, Ignatius laments that he cannot write Marmee. Fortuna has spun downward. Mrs. Levy moans as the motorized exercise board needs her ample flesh and commences harping on how Gus is throwing his life away and ruining his father's business. Gus has a headache left over from firing some big cook Gonzalez hired and who has led a workers' rebellion. Mrs. Levy sides with Ignatius. Susan and Sandra have written how their friends think the factory sounds like a plantation and refuse to come home again unless Gus raises wages. Gus has seen his wife's letters to the girls, bristling with hostility against his countless injustices. Mrs. Levy declares this action against a young idealist is heartbreaking proof that Gus has hardened. He has drained her of warmth and idealism. She and the girls are disillusioned. Gus cares only about his sports cars. Gus takes the offensive, pointing out her constant attacks, insecurity, and guilt complexes. What she has done to Trixie is characteristic. He has forced her to remain on the job, alone and afraid. Mrs. Levy lacks outlets for her idealism and feels useless and caged in. If Gus brings Trixie for her to work on, Mrs. Levy will not write the girls about the firing. Mrs. Levy demands Gus see the analyst who cured Lenny's complexes and freed him to make his business prosper. Sandra, too, has benefited from psychoanalysis. Unless she gets Trixie, the girls will get a letter. Chapter 7. Ignatius happens upon Paradise Vendors, Ints. Most passers-by are repulsed by the stench, but Ignatius is drawn in. An old man, Mr. Clyde, attends a boiling pot, and Ignatius asks to buy one hot dog. He selects and consumes 4 with blissful savagery, and while criticizing Clyde's abominable whistling, he is then ready to resume his job quest. Most days, he confides, he is so discouraged, he sits in movie palaces. Clyde offers Ignatius a job on the spot, but he declines. Clyde demands $1 for the weenies Ignatius ate and holds a long fork at Ignatius's throat, declaring he will not be robbed again. Ignatius whines he has only bus fare. Clyde offers to call them even if Ignatius takes a wagon out for an hour. Clyde softens, telling how he has fought for 10 years to give Paradise Vendors a reputable name. Decent vendors are hard to find because of popular antipathy toward the profession. Why does God make life so hard? Ignatius suggests Boethius for insight. Ignatius is happy to don a white smock, but refuses to replace his green cap with a paper cap. Clyde relents. Clyde stocks a cart with a dozen hot dogs, buns, and condiments, and warns Ignatius it is illegal to push carts on the sidewalk. Ignatius figures a police presence will forestall robbery. Pedestrian traffic parts for Ignatius, but no one stops him to buy. Still, Ignatius figures this is better than facing personnel managers, and he lacks funds for a movie. Out of Clyde's line of sight around the corner, Ignatius parks and treats himself to a hot dog. Mother has been surly all week, threatening to sell the house and lauding Mancuso's fight to retain his job. Ignatius has given Irene the consolation of philosophy with recommendations for passages about accepting what one cannot change that Mancuso might wish to read. This kind gesture brings peace to the house. Within 15 minutes, Ignatius has consumed most of his stock and sets off to sell the rest. Carrying an armload of packages, George asks for a hot dog. Ignatius's valve protests the boy's pimply, surly face, and he brushes him aside. George is hungry and opens a lid to see if there is stock. Ignatius roars for police protection. As the two scream insults at each other, a small crowd gathers, and people take George's side. Ignatius calms himself by consuming a hot dog and then waddles slowly onward. 2 more hot dogs fortify him for the last leg of his trip, which Ignatius undertakes at a trot. Clyde protests. Ignatius has not been out an hour and is suspicious of Ignatius's story. A nondescript teen held a pistol to his head and no one would help. The perpetrator, perhaps so crazed by television that he sublimates his sexual urges in food, has taken only hot dogs. Ignatius is lucky to have escaped rape. Clyde asks Ignatius to make another try, but Ignatius is so traumatized he must go home to soak in a hot tub. Clyde begs him to return tomorrow. Ignatius agrees, if he feels well enough. He will wear the smock home to prove to his alcoholic mother he is employed. Home life is grim. Ignatius explains to Clyde the mystery of his valve. Jones quits cleaning the bar as soon as Lana leaves on a shopping trip and begins studying life ads by the light over the cash register. Jones's sabotage plot has left dust so thick it looks plowed rather than mopped. For higher pay, he might do a better job, Jones suggests, and launches into a speech about how blacks pay the same as whites for food and clothing. Lena reminds him she took him off the streets and keeps him out of jail. Lena ought to quit giving charity and slip him more money, Jones complains. With the plainclothesman out of the way, it is safe to put Darlene back on a stool talking to patrons. When Darlene and her huge, loud cockatoo arrive, she is told the bad news. Darlene plugs a new angle, having the bird help her strip. Lena is afraid the bird will hurt someone and ruin her investment, but Jones has seen rehearsals and figures the act will offer excellent sabotage. He helps Darlene assure Lena the act will draw customers, especially if a doorman hawks it on the street. Lana agrees to an audition. Irene phones Santa to relate how his new job has broken her heart. The women agree. Being a hot dog vendor makes Ignatius a bum, a vagrant. Santa reports Mantuso has pneumonia. Santa does not trust any inspirational literature Ignatius might lend him. Irene returns to her shame. Should anyone she knows see Ignatius pushing a cart, Santa advises Irene she needs a good man in the house to set Ignatius straight, promises to learn the old man's name, and suggests they all have a party at her house. Ignatius hears half of the conversation while thrashing in the bathtub, thinking about new material for his journal. When the water has relaxed his valve, Ignatius emerges and opens an envelope. It contains a folded poster announcing a lecture on sex and politics to be given by M. Mankoff at the IMHA in New York. On the other side, Myrna asks why he has not written. She insists a good explosive orgasm will cleanse his being. The movie project is off, primarily for lack of funds. The upcoming lecture grew out of meeting an unbelievable boy just returned from Israel who cannot understand why Myrna keeps her musical social protest to herself. Irene demands Ignatius get out of the tub, but he requests peace to finish Myrna's letter. Her getting him fired from Levy Pants may be a blessing in disguise, as the new job looks agreeable. Irene yells through the door Santa's opinion that someone ought to punch Ignatius in the nose. Refusing to discuss Myrna, Ignatius orders his mother off to her wine, housework, or a nap. Irene warns if he gives her a stroke, Ignatius will be alone in the world, wishing he had not mistreated his poor mother. Ignatius returns to his letter. Myrna declares her new friend a real mensch, tough-minded and gentlemanly. Myrna will speak in Brooklyn Heights and did not need to use sex to get this opportunity. She has learned the folk singer is a fraud, reminding her of the time she was feeding a squirrel in the park, and it turned out to be a rat. The Bronx I crowd is likely to be parochial, but great thinkers air their views there. Is Ignatius's paranoia worsening? His brain would flower in New York. Old Oedipal bonds are destroying him. He has doubtlessly abandoned his plans to form a divine right party. Otherwise, she could help organize a New York chapter. Myrna closes by begging Ignatius to get out of the house and enter the world around him. She is worried about his future. Ignatius emerges pucker, skinned, ignores Irene's lamentation about wasting her inheritance, funding his education, and sits down to reply to Myrna's offensive communication. The squirrel rat symbolism is evocative, but the remaining contents are obscene. Ignatius advises Myrna to cancel the lecture, which no one will attend, and announces his personal life has undergone a metamorphosis. He will write later about his new food merchandising involvement. Chapter 8. Trixie sits before Mrs. Levy, who is anxious to try out a program outlined in a correspondence course in psychology Mrs. Levy took but failed miserably. The snarling old woman, tired and confused, has been put on indefinite vacation instead of being retired. Mrs. Levy advises Trixie she is suffering age psychosis and that in reality she is still a very attractive woman. Gus wishes his wife would return to another of her hobbies and threatens to ship her to San Juan. Mrs. Levy asks Trixie about dreams she cannot remember. Trixie would rather be with Gomez than listening to the Levys argue. She misses poor kind Gloria, Ignatius, and recalls how Gus walked in one day and kicked Gloria out. Trixie wants to leave and threatens to get even, but Mrs. Levy pins her to the sofa. Mancuso is getting sicker, and claustrophobia attacks him in the bathroom stall. Reading about Boethius's Wheel of Fortune is depressing, and his mind wanders from Ignatius' book. Mancuso sees a boy who seems to visit the station daily and steps out to ask what he is doing. George looks over the disguise and orders this character, as odd as the hot dog vendor, to move away. Sensing fear in the boy, Mancuso places George under arrest. But George grabs the thick book, slams it down on the undercover officer's head, and escapes. George collects the packages stored in a locker and flees to the night of joy. Lana is angry about their bad luck. With the bus station unsafe, George will need a new afternoon hiding place. At least, Lana has her prop book. Santa kisses the only picture she has of her poor late mother. Santa assures her she lights candles for her every day. Irene and Mancuso arrive. Irene reports how Mancuso lost Ignatius' book and is worried Ignatius' will find out about it. Santa is determined Ignatius' ghost not haunt her party and changes the subject anytime his name comes up. Have a drink and dance with the old man. Do not disappoint the poor old man. Do not disappoint the poor old man, she counsels, and orders Mancuso to lie down until the final guest arrives. Irene hopes the old man will forget and not come. With her nerves bothering her, Irene pours and consumes her third drink, which Santa pulls from her lips and lists all the reasons Irene needs a man with money. Irene brightens at the thought of finding a way out of debt. Claude Robichaud, the rich old man, arrives. Tending his grandchildren detained him. He is introduced to Irene, who sits frozen on the sofa. Both remember the confrontation with Mancuso, and Claude launches into an attack on the communist police. Claude hopes never to see that man again. They called his daughter that day, and the whole family knows he was hauled in. Santa recalls how her mother was arrested 4 times, but did not care. Mothers have a hard life, Irene observes. So do police officers, Santa says, and sometimes they make mistakes. She has relatives named Mancuso on the force, and one of them is sleeping in the back. Irene is panicky. Santa orders her to pour Claude a drink while she wakes her nephew. Seeming neat and freshly pressed, Claude asks how Ignatius is doing. Claude bets Irene is a good mother and proclaims Ignatius a fine, looking big boy. Good training and safety are important, he observes. Irene opens up about the awful cross she has to bear and breaks into wild tears. Ignatius is breaking her heart. He writes foolishness no one will read and exchanges insults with poor Myrna. Irene should have him hauled away to a detention home. Claude suggests enlisting a priest help, but Irene reveals Ignatius got into a fight with one who refused his dog a funeral. Ignatius now considers him a heretic and will not talk with him. And now Ignatius is pushing around a weenie wagon. Word of that dishonor is all over the neighborhood. Claude suggests Ignatius spent too long in college, where communists abound. Irene considers how communists treat their mothers badly and agrees to ask Ignatius about his politics. Claude remembers admiring Irene's character the 2 times he saw her and has asked Santa to help them meet. Irene wishes Angelo would have locked Ignatius away. When Claude asks who Angelo is. Irene panics and tries to escape. Seeing Mancuso, Claude screams he would punch him in the nose if he were not a dirty cop. Santa tries to pacify Claude. Mancuso is sick and depressed. Irene puts all the blame on Ignatius and wishes again he had been jailed. She begs Claude to take pity on Mancuso's plight. Santa declares it Claude's fault that Mancuso is so sick now. Mancuso is sorry he took the old man in. Irene takes the blame for protecting Ignatius, who truly is a troublemaker. Santa declares Ignatius should be punched or beaten up. Claude and Mancuso shake hands. Santa puts on a deafening record and suggests Irene and Claude dance, but everyone stares at the linoleum. Suddenly, Irene screams about Ignatius running water into the tub and probably forgetting to turn it off. Chapter 9. Clyde confronts Ignatius over complaints from the Board of Health. Ignatius defends himself and then tries to turn the conversation to the cart he received or the grueling musical he saw last night. Clyde remains focused. Did Ignatius pick a cat out of the gutter as reported? What was he doing so far from their routes? No wonder he sells nothing. Ignatius feels unappreciated. He comes to work only for fear of his vicious mother. Clyde offers him one last chance, a better route, and some merchandising gimmicks. Clyde orders Ignatius into the French Quarter. After deducting the cost of the hot dogs Ignatius has eaten, Clyde hands him $1.25 and threatens to fire him unless he shows up early tomorrow. Irene falls on her knees and asks why the Lord has given her such a terrible cross to bear. Ignatius is getting worse every day. Ignatius denies being a communist and settles in to watch Yogi Bear. Irene hands him an envelope from Myrna, who writes that his last letter was sick and petty. Unga, a virile, and aggressive exchange student from Kenya, intends to attend her lecture. At least Ignatius is alive. She warns he faces a crack-up unless he snaps out of his apathy and gets out of the house. Opening his heart will open his valve. Myrna asks that he describe any sex fantasies he is having so she can interpret them. Members of her therapy group are following his case. She wishes she could get away on an inspection tour and see him personally. Red-faced, Ignatius throws the letter away and screams that Myrna is braying at some unfortunate Negro. In public, Irene says black people lead a hard life and launches into a story, which Ignatius cuts off furiously. Irene forges on, but when she mentions giving a poor black woman a quarter, Ignatius lashes out at this waste of money. His valve is screaming for appeasement. Annie demands they shut up, and Ignatius sweeps away, contemplating his next assault on Marina's effrontery, politics, and sex. Lena balances on a bar stool. What she has seen of Darlene's rehearsals gives little hope for the act. The bird makes up for Darlene's ineptitude and may draw a crowd. Darlene bumps lasciviously to Stranger in Paradise, and the bird grabs a ring on her dress to pop it open. Lina will not see her decent club defiled like this. They must rethink the act. Jones suggests Darlene play a sweet, pure virgin, surprised when the bird grabs at her clothes. That will provide drama. Lina likes the idea. Darlene will be a refined Southern belle, still having her honor when the ball is over. Then the bird startles her by grabbing her dress, Darlene agrees, but cannot master her one simple line. Lena tells Jones again, ranting about poor wages, that if he wants to help Darlene, whom he obviously likes, he must play an Old South doorman to pack the bar. While Lana drags Darlene and the bird into the alley, Jones sees in the cabinet, which Lana absent-mindedly leaves ajar, 10 packages, a globe, a box of chalk, and a book. In tiny letters, Jones writes the bar's address on each package, figuring this may somehow advance his plan. Mancuso begs his sergeant to free him from the bathroom. not wanting to be responsible for Mancuso's death, just wanting him off the force. The sergeant returns Mancuso to the streets for 2 weeks of probation. Ignatius ignores his mother's door, pounding and lamentation about 50. Income. He confides to his journal that jealousy over his physique and worldview has made the czar of sausage turn on him. Chaste, impressionable working boy has been condemned to experience every variety of degradation in the French Quarter. Ignatius vows not to land on Skid Row or on park benches. He requires a modicum of creature comforts. Conditions at home have deteriorated. Mother is an agent of his destruction, biting the hand that feeds her. Clyde demands he wear a pirate outfit as a nod to New Orleans folklore, but his stature allows him to don only a red scarf, gold earring, and plastic cutlass. Ignatius recalls tourists approving of his costume as he wheels his cart towards the quarter, where he implores appropriate saints for help and imagines the melodrama of Irene mourning at his low-cost funeral had Clyde slain him during their mock duel. The cutlass helps Ignatius feel like a crusader as he enters the quarter. Ignatius sleeps on the curb until a rude police officer awakens him. Ignatius imagines the indecent acts people of the quarter are performing. Doubtlessly, they are watching him hungrily behind shutters. Midwestern tourists ask to photograph Ignatius, and he pleases them with a series of artful poses. They depart without reimbursing their model, and because a working boy can use every penny, Ignatius is about to chase them down when he is intercepted by Mancuso, dressed as a tourist. Ignatius demands his book back or written critique upon completion. Having sold only one hot dog, Ignatius is certain he has a white elephant route, but maybe the quarter will suggest a crusade for taste and decency he can use against Marina. A social note laments work will keep him from the premiere of a sophisticated comedy. A health note observes Ignatius is gaining weight astonishingly. No doubt, mother's fault. He signs the entry, Lance, your besieged working boy. Dr. Tulsa is delighted when a lovely girl praises his fresh, unorthodox approach to history and debates inviting her to share a drink. He admits to having no more interest in Celtic Britain than the students with whom he feels rapport. Talk wishes there were more girls like this wide-eyed creature and fewer like the dreadful, slovenly Minkoff girl who was raped outside his office. He remembers how she and the really monster tormented him and wonders if they married or defected to Cuba. The girl asks about a report she handed in 2 months earlier. His bubble burst, Toss searches his desk, and a paper airplane falls to the floor. The girl picks it up and reads Zorzro's threat to hang Talk by his testicles until dead. The girl drops the airplane into her purse. Chapter 10. Gus Levy is a nice guy, popular among sportsmen, but void of friends at home. Having survived another Christmas with his daughters, demanding money and threatening to disavow him if he continues to mistreat their mother, fueled by Mrs. Levi's usual list of their father's injustices and brutalities. Gus is looking forward to escaping to Florida and Arizona. Mrs. Levy has Trixie stretched out on the couch, slathered in facial cream and snapping a stupendous new set of false teeth every time she snarls for silence. Mrs. Levy remarks that Trixie's self-confidence is returning, but she still subconsciously hates Levy Pants. Mrs. Levy knows all about Gloria, the soul of kindness. Gus assures her there is no Gloria except in Trixie's twilight zone. Mrs. Levy implores Gus to see Lenny's miracle working doctor. Gus suggests the doctor help by buying Levy Pants, which 3 realtors have declared unsaleable. Mrs. Levy is aghast that Gus would sell his heritage. It is a chamber pot. Gus declares, and heads to the whirlpool, contemplating dumping the property and throwing the hateful exercise table into the Gulf. Mrs. Levy adjusts a coiffed black wig on Trixie's head. Trixie looks like Mrs. Levy's mother. Jones is back in Maddie's Ramble Inn complaining about being dressed up like a plantation darky by Lana. While jail is a sure way to eat regularly, Jones would rather starve. Jones tells Watson the sabotage is going well. The floor is ankle deep in dust. Jones hopes the police will find the bar's address on those packages. Jones is too frightened by the police to talk to them as Watson advises. Watson reports no news on the Levy Pants demonstration. Jones would like to find the freak in the green hat because he would be a nice touch on opening night. Ignatius's valve has failed through Paradise Products and maternal antagonism. Ignatius believes Irene has fallen under the control of a right-wing fringe group. Normally apolitical, Irene votes only for candidates known to be kind to their mothers. She is constantly questioning his political philosophy. Myrna appears to him in dreams, heckling his sexuality. These dreams are worse than the old bus ones. The French Quarter is an impossible venue, and Ignatius's take-home pay is getting smaller, which only makes Irene surlier. Reading that a ladies' art guild is holding an outdoor exhibition, Ignatius positions his cart nearby. He letters a sign, 12 inches, 12, of paradise, and tapes it to the cart, but none of the well-dressed ladies responds. Instead, they beg him to move on. Anger brings on a fit of violent belching. After a heated debate over aesthetics, Ignatius waddles off to rest and inspect his aching feet. Dorian Green, who bought Irene's hat in the night of joy, approaches Ignatius. Ignatius threatens to strike down the intruder. Dorian inquires about Ignatius's outfit, and Ignatius strikes out with his cutlass, which Dorian dodges, giggling and dancing about. Throwing one of his boots, Ignatius again misses. But Dorian's aim is true, and Ignatius wails he has been disfigured and threatens to sue for assault. Dorian counsels caution lest Ignatius be booked for something worse. Ignatius erupts when the degenerate asks about his dear, sweet mother. Dorian hopes she does not know her son is flouncing around looking like a Hungarian Joan of Arc. Dorian taunts Ignatius, suggesting he and his friends just may use connections in high places to take over the country, as Ignatius fears. A sword thrust ruins Dorian's cashmere sweater, and he seizes Ignatius' hoop earring. Ignatius drops his weapon, howling in pain, and threatening federal prison and a lifetime of medical bills. Dorian mourns the ruination of his favorite sweater. Eventually, they agree it is prudent to settle out of court. Ignatius suggests Dorian run off with a lonely-looking sailor drifting along Chartres Saint. That is Timmy, Dorian remarks, one of his oldest friends, and certainly no sailor. Mancuso, attired in beret and goatee, is stalking Timmy, and Dorian shrieks gaily that everyone in the quarter knows about Mancuso and thinks him marvelous. He wears such wonderful disguises. They have twice had him arrested for making indecent proposals just to enjoy the show. Ignatius sees the possibility for worldwide deception. Old sodomites taking over military leadership and turning the next war into a massive orgy. That could mean an end to war. It could also help him get one up on Myrna. Dorian agrees it would be a wonderful solution and help end the population explosion. Unhappy with birth control, Ignatius sees additional benefit and not finding anything on the horizon more likely to save the world, declares he will dedicate space in his journal for this valuable new insight. Dorian breaks into a Ruby Keeler song and performs a soft shoe. Ignatius orders Dorian to be serious. Have his people considered forming a political party and running a candidate for president. Ignatius declares. Oratorically, they must save the world. Dorian declares the conversation is depressing him, the way his father used to, and begs he must be running along. Ignatius restrains him, demanding they hold a large organizational meeting. Dorian sees an opportunity for a fun party. Ignatius offers to share his extensive knowledge of political organization by lecturing. He orders that there be red, white, and blue bunting. Dorian squeals with pleasure, promising yards of it, and plenty of close friends. Ignatius is so much more fun than he appeared in that tacky bar. Few people comprehend his worldview, Ignatius replies, suggesting Dorian read Boethius and early medieval literature and then skip forward to select comic books. Batman, in particular, whose morality is rigid. Dorian promises to work to exhaustion. The kickoff rally will be held in his home. Ignatius hopes the core group will be serious and allows that a few tasteful costumes will lend the gathering an international atmosphere. No female impersonators, however, since they will cause resentment among rural voters. As Dorian skips away, Ignatius treats himself to a hot dog and hopes to face no more customers today. Fortuna has spun the wheel to let him confound Myrna, the minx. George needs storage for his packages. Carrying them into movies or wandering the streets with them is uncomfortable and dangerous. If one breaks open in public, George will land in a juvenile detention home. George curses that undercover agent who must have SP. George sits safely through Mass in St. Louis Cathedral and then wanders to Chartres Saint, where he answers a sailor's wink with an obscene gesture. George hears shouting and sees the crazy hot dog vendor trying to stab some fairy with his plastic knife. The vendor looks like he is made up for Mardi Gras. Spotting Mantuso dressed as a beatnik, George flees uptown. Outside the night of joy, George finds Lana giving directions about a poster. Suddenly, George realizes where he can store his packages and is furious at not seeing it earlier. The Oddball Vendor's Wagon. Chapter 11. Santa, Claude, and Irene are having coffee. The women are discussing Debbie Reynolds' new film. Ignatius has hung a Peace to Men of Goodwill sign outside the house, and Annie has launched an inquisition. To Claude it, suggests communism. Santa resumes her argument for having Ignatius put away. Mancuso, she reports, says Ignatius is wearing an earring. With his railroad pension and some rental income, Claude has bought his daughter a new electric range. Irene could use one of those. Claude is tired of living with his daughter's family. Irene says, if she had a child that nice to her, she would stay where she is. Santa kicks her, and Irene innocently begins talking about her sore feet. Santa makes another face, which Irene ignores. Ignatius was heavy as a baby, and carrying him ruined her feet and gave her arthritis, she believes. Santa resumes her call for attending the movie. Claude never goes to the show, but agrees. Santa demands that Irene stop thinking about Ignatius and lock him away in the charity hospital where they can make him behave. Claude snorts at socialized medicine and communism, and Irene doubts the poor nuns running the charity are communists. Santa does not care who runs the hospital. It is the right place for Ignatius. Irene sees little alternative, but worries whether he will listen to the doctors. They will make him listen, Santa assures her, too eagerly and quite graphically. Claude agrees. Irene must think about herself before Ignatius puts her in her grave. He will not straighten out selling weenies, Santa declares, and suggests they go to the movie. The trio walks through the warm evening air. Passing a funeral parlor, they learn old lady Lopez, whom Santa knows slightly, and Irene not at all, has died of a heart attack. Both would pay respects if they were better dressed, and both vowed to offer masses for her soul. Claude insists on purchasing the movie tickets, which brings relief to Irene, who calculates all she has spent recently on Ignatius. She is nervous when Claude takes her hand and considers fleeing. Santa orders her to watch the movie, but Irene breaks into tears, and a frightened Claude comforts her. Ignatius records in his journal his surprising day in the quarter. A cherished old acquaintance, Deviate, helps him conceive a daring, magnificent solution to the crisis of their times. Dorian's associates in foppery will gather under the Save the World Through Degeneracy banner to get one of their number elected to the presidency, infiltrate the military, and soldiers and officers will be so busy talking about tailored uniforms at cocktail parties they will have no time for battle. Worldwide, perverts will follow. Once in power, pederasts will not know what to do with nuclear weapons, and international quarrels will be resolved in men's rooms at the redecorated UN. Common folk will learn to enjoy ballets and musicals and be happier than under their old fascist leaders. Only perverts have been denied a chance to run the world, which is a global disgrace. Degeneracy will bring peace and new solutions to new problems. Ignatius will guide and mentor the movement as Boethius advised degenerate Rome. This breathtaking scheme will also confound literalistic, cliched Myrna. The crusade for Moorish dignity failed because of the bourgeois views of its participants. If Myrna wants sex in politics, Ignatius will deliver plenty. She cannot be allowed to go unchecked. Pragmatism fights morality in Ignatius's brain, but peace is the overwhelming concern. Ignatius foresees film producers filming his internal debate and suggests how to stage it as a musical. He must disappoint readers interested in news about Frankfurters because his mind is too preoccupied. In a social note, Ignatius reports his truant mother's constant, blistering attacks are affecting his valve, but she is often absent on made-up excuses. He is compelled to attend a sophisticated comedy opening downtown, which will, of course, flaunt theology and geometry, taste and decency, but he cannot resist watching it. In a health note, Ignatius reports his stomach is growing out of bounds. He signs himself, Tab, your pacifist, working boy. Mrs. Levy helps a renovated Trixie up the steps into Levy pants, assuring her she is needed, wanted, and missed. Trixie feels tricked out of retirement. Gonzalez is heartbroken to see her, but promises to give her responsibility. He identifies, but Trixie refuses to meet. A tall, threadbare, scratching new file clerk. Trixie thinks Zelatimo looks like a gangster. Gonzalez gives Gus his mail, pointing out a message from Abelman's. It expresses shock and grief at receiving Gus' recent letter and declares they are suing for $500,000. Reading the attached copy of the offending letter, Gus realizes Abelman has struck gold. Gonzalez is perplexed, and Mrs. Levy rants about the business being ruined. The girls will have to quit college and become prostitutes. Demanding silence, Trixie declares them the noisiest people she ever met. Gus knows Gonzalez did not write that letter. There is no Abelman folder. The whole drawer is empty, so they have no grounds for defense. The phone rings and Jones asks if the fat mother with a green cap is working there. Gonzalez dazedly says no and slams down the receiver. Someone asking for Mr. Reilly, he reports. Mrs. Levy wonders who would want the young idealist who is doubtlessly out helping unfortunates. Gonzalez confirms Ignatius was employed at the time of the letter and handled outgoing mail. Mrs. Levy explodes at the thought that they intend to frame the young idealist. Gus reminds her that the alternative is admitting he is the author, which will land her in the poorhouse. Mrs. Levy casts Ignatius to his fate. Gus wants Ignatius's phone number, and Trixie has to be awakened for access to the phone book she hoards. Gus reaches a tipsy-sounding, weeping woman who says, "Mr. Reilly is out until late afternoon." Gonzalez has to attend to a factory accident. Gus admonishes him to treat Trixie well to lessen her deep-seated hatred of the company. Gus will get in touch with Ignatius. They cannot sue him for a letter he did not write. Mrs. Levy surveys the sad remnants of a family business so pathetic that it has driven a young idealist to revenge, but takes pride in the miraculous restoration of Trixie, shown in the conviction with which she ordered everyone out of the office. Trixie sinks her new teeth into Zelatimo's hand when he asks help alphabetizing, and Gonzalez hears the screaming from the riotous factory. In their sports car, Mrs. Levy announces plans to establish the Leon Levy Foundation, honoring her father-in-law. It will comfort Susan and Sandra. This Abelman business is the most dangerous of Gus' many mistakes. Sensing his wife has a slush fund in mind, Gus rejects the idea. Leon was so mean that recipients of money in his name will sue for libel. Mrs. Levy should take up another hobby. Gus must consult Lenny's saving doctor before it is too late, and not put off getting in touch with the idealist criminal. Gus has a revelation. Lenny's doctor can analyze Ignatius and get the state to put him away so he cannot wreck people's lives. George stakes out the Paradise vendor's garage, planning to offer the poor vendor a few dollars to serve as his carrier. Around 1 p.m., Ignatius billows off the trolley, still in costume. He looks stupid, but George knows from the way he talks that Ignatius spent a long time in school. George will play up education and money to rent space in the cart. An old man with a fork yells after Ignatius that he must bring in $5 profit today, or else. Ignatius is late because stayed up late composing his kickoff lecture. He has only 10 in his pocket and wants badly to go to the Arco Orpheum for the film debut. That means he must sell 5-6 hot dogs quickly and park the wagon somewhere to reach the theater on time. Ignatius is too wrapped up in his sales plan to notice one of his tires lodge in the groove of a streetcar track. As he hears a streetcar approach, Ignatius feels his valve slam shut and struggles frantically to extract the cart, but succeeds only in overturning it, spilling the hot dogs onto the pavement. George seizes the opportunity to help his mark, and Ignatius rudely accepts. George hands Ignatius $2, which Ignatius takes as amends for their earlier meeting. George declines a hot dog, but asks Ignatius's help in storing packages of school supplies until the schools close and he is able to deliver them. Ignatius belches skepticism, but is convinced by $10 a week. George forbids Ignatius to examine the contents, but Ignatius rips one open and finds postcards of a nude woman sitting on a desk beside a globe. A copy of The Consolation of Philosophy obscures the model's face. Ignatius is impressed by such good taste. He pockets a card and an address written on a scrap of wrapping paper. George refuses to identify the brilliant woman depicted, leaving Ignatius to muse about her plight and determined to meet her. Despite his misgivings, Ignatius agrees to make his card available daily, provided George watch it this afternoon while he keeps an urgent appointment. Ignatius warns George he has a friend on the force who will gladly lock George up if he crosses him. Mancuso's name strikes fear in George. Ignatius orders George to meet him in 2 hours and billows grandly off. George is furious at having been taken and being stuck with the wagon for the afternoon. Ignatius arrives at the theater just in time, plotting how to blackmail George into watching the wagon daily. Ignatius snorts at the movie credits and shouts filth. During the first seduction scene, a lady with a shopping bag comments to her neighbor about how rude matinee audiences are. Ignatius rages at the screen and wrestles for control of his cutlass with an elderly usherette sent to control him. Ignatius shouts to the end of the film and is tempted to stay for another showing, but remembers George. Ignatius is physically spent and emotionally traumatized when they rendezvous. As George slouches away with his packages, Ignatius eats a hot dog and studies the photograph. The woman's air of solitude, detachment, solitary sensuality, and scholarly pleasure appeal to him. What a contribution she will make to the journal. Ignatius sets off to find the Bourbon Saint address on the scrap of paper, pondering an affair with the model. What envy that will bring out in Myrne. Ignatius will not tell the woman how he came across her until he has overwhelmed her with discussions of Boethius. Arriving outside the Night of Joy, Ignatius realizes his heroine has fallen into the hands of fiends. A poster announces performances by Roberta E. Lee as Harlot O'Hara, the Virgin, Nibel, and Pet. Ignatius is intrigued, but fearful of facing the Nazi owner. Lena is satisfied with the act, and the money George is delivering with the new merchandise. Even Joan seems to be broken. Seeing Ignatius on the curb, Lena orders him away. His earring will make people think this is a gay bar. Darlene inquires about Ignatius's poor mama. Jones refuses to chase the character away because Bouncer's beginning rate is $50 a week. Ignatius is too traumatized and exhausted to fear a beating and resigns himself to torture by the particularly terrifying, dope-crazed Negro. Observing his forceful stand in defense of civil rights left him crippled here today. Jones is surprised to hear Levy Pants fired him. Ignatius wonders how Jones knows about that fiasco. Delighted to have become a legend, Ignatius offers Jones a hot dog, assuring him he extends courteous service to all colors and creeds. Jones cannot believe the good luck of having Ignatius drop from the sky just when he needs him most. Jones asks why an educated person is selling hot dogs. He should have a good job and everything money can buy. Ignatius objects that this is a pleasant outdoor occupation and someone working in a bar has no right to criticize. Jones claims he has goals, which Ignatius is certain must be bourgeois, and laments Jones's brainwashing. Ignatius asks if there is a woman in the bar given to reading. He is anxious to meet her. Jones is confused but suggests Ignatius come for opening night. Ignatius imagines a brilliant satire on the decadent Old South but fears the Nazi owner. Realizing his sabotage plot is falling into place, Jones assures Ignatius that Lena will be away and promises a ringside table. The two laugh conspiratorially as Ignatius prepares to leave. Ignatius hopes Jones will read Boethius to ward off a nervous breakdown. Ask Miss O'Hara about Boethius, he advises. Ignatius would be happy to be a vagrant. The workers at Levy Pants are lucky they have not landed in Angola, Jones thinks. He points out to Ignatius that someone has decorated his 12 inches, 12, of paradise sign with drawings of genitalia. Ignatius removes the sign and heads to the ferry ramp where he sells his remaining hot dogs. Fortuna is on his side. Clyde is amazed to receive $10, and Ignatius rides the trolley home with a glad heart. Irene is on the phone, quietly agreeing with Santa that Ignatius belongs in the charity. Claude, who is ready to pop the question, will not want Ignatius around. Santa advises. Irene is nervous about Claude's fixation on communism. However, Santa figures once he is married, Claude will drop it. Santa says she and Claude will pick Irene up tonight for dinner and hangs up. Irene thrusts her hand into Ignatius's pocket to see how much he earned. Finding the postcard, she refuses to hear an explanation and sends Ignatius to his room. The phone rings and Irene says it must be Mr. Lovely for the third time today. Ignatius fakes an accent to avoid talking with Gus. Ignatius informs him Mr. Reilly has been admitted to the state hospital in Mandeville. Gus' vicious dismissal is resulting in staggering psychiatrist bills that Levy Pants can expect to receive. Ignatius suggests Gus visit the poor man in the hospital and bring cookies. Ignatius feels the wheel revolving skyward as he enters his room. Chapter 12. Ignatius's kickoff rally preparations are interrupted by a special mail delivery. Myrna's frantic response to Ignatius' telegram asking that she recruit sodomites for a new political party. Myrna is confused and worried to find him hanging around with queers. She has warned he will come to crisis by blocking normal sexual outlets so long. She begs him to flee to New York. Myrna was prepared to join the Divine Right Party, but this sodomite party cannot succeed. Sodomites will claim sexual discrimination. Myrna's lecture went over everyone's heads. She was heckled. Anga abandoned her. Myrna demands an immediate reply. Ignatius is pleased and cannot wait to shock Myrna by Miss O'Hara. Ignatius evades Irene's questions about the envelope and why he is preparing to go out again. Ignatius announces he will address a political meeting tonight, which pleases Irene, until he declares the party must be kept secret for the moment. She has been reading about communists lately in pamphlets which Ignatius has seen, and suspects were left for him to find. Ignatius pronounces them illiterate garbage. He is not a communist. Irene suggests resting a while at Charity, where he could write. Ignatius is irate. Ignatius is irate and refuses to be brainwashed. Psychiatry, he declares, is worse than communism. The nation's asylums are filled with victimized martyrs. Irene demands to know where Ignatius has gotten the money to pay for the cab that arrives. He claims that he has been collecting pennies, concealing his successful blackmailing of George, Fortuna's recent gift to him. Irene is shocked to see Ignatius in pirate regalia and forbids him to leave the house that way. When Ignatius refuses to stop or to reveal the contents of his speech, Irene slaps him on the face. Ignatius menaces her with his scimitar, and Irene lands another blow. Ignatius runs into the yard, daring his mother to follow in her shredded nightgown. Annie demands they knock it off. Irene reaches the curb as the taxi speeds off. She must phone Santa. Ignatius hears frenetic singing and laughter emanating from Dorian's 3-story stucco building. He mentally denounces the recent defacing of the vintage 18th century facade with canary yellow paint and various tasteless decorations. Ignatius rings the bell and Damien admits him, upset over the tardiness. Things are getting out of hand. Feelings are running high. Ignatius is concerned that no warmongering resolutions come out of this initial rally. Dorian reveals that he owns the building through financial support supplied by relatives in Nebraska who demand only that he stay away. Growing up there was depressing. Dorian enjoyed college in the East and then found freedom in New Orleans. Ignatius would have preferred to rent an American Legion Hall, but this perverted building will have to do. Dorian is insulted, but comments only on Ignatius's earring. Responding to screams of distress, Dorian and Ignatius find Timmy chained to the wall. "Mean Billy and Raoul did this." Timmy cries and begs to be set free. Dorian is concerned only with the door Ignatius destroyed following the screams. Dorian orders Timmy out of his house, but Ignatius cautions the movement must avoid internal strife. He wishes the two deviates would show some taste and decency. Ignatius feels his valve closing and to shut Timmy up, raps him over the head with his cutlass. As Dorian frees Timmy, Ignatius muses how manacles and chains could transform suburban life. He will develop this theme in his journal. In the main room, Ignatius soaks in the seething mass of people worshiping Judy Garland on the phonograph as a sort of electric tabernacle or variously nodding together in obscene postures. They are human furnishings in a severe room. These people will make it difficult to capture the redneck Calvinist vote, Ignatius calculates. Ignatius is upset that no one in this wetted sepulchre of a room has greeted, or even noticed, him. These people care only about their private fates. Dorian informs Ignatius that this is the first good party they have had in months and points out a bud vase containing one red, one white, and one blue rose. He thought that better than Crete paper. Ignatius declares it an abomination, and Dorian leads him aside to the kitchen to meet the ladies' auxiliary. Organizing that shows foresight, Ignatius commends Dorian. Seated at the table are three tough women drinking canned beer. Frida, Betty, and Liz greet Ignatius with a raucous Bronx cheer. They are bored in the kitchen, and Liz has to break up a chair fight between Frida and Betty. Ignatius pleads for peace and ducks an unopened beer can aimed at his head. Dorian steps in. He is keeping them isolated to prevent the brawl they would surely start with his other friends. Dorian explains they would crash the party if uninvited and are in a bad mood tonight because of police trouble the other day. Ignatius demands they be expelled to keep the movement unbesmirched, but Dorian feels sorry for them. They were forced to leave California after assaulting a bodybuilder, and they serve as watchdogs and protectors in exchange for sanctuary in his building. Ignatius sees value in this for the movement. It is time, Ignatius declares in a business, like tone, to shut off the phonograph and get down to business. Dorian is annoyed that Ignatius has turned out to be so dreary and wishes he would leave, chanting peace. Ignatius pulls the plug and commands silence so he can speak about saving the world. Now all eyes are on the grotesque figure. The guests are not amused at this interruption of their fun and prepare to go elsewhere. Ignatius finds his notes and talks of apocalypse. Guests fear Ignatius's eyes and demand Dorian end this inappropriate, tasteless charade. Dorian restores power to the phonograph and begins actively ignoring Ignatius, who flashes back to a high school chemistry accident that made him wet himself. Ignatius shadow duels to relieve his discomfort and tries in vain to get Dorian's attention. Bored in the kitchen, Frida, Liz, and Betty burst through the door and attach themselves to Ignatius. Timmy asks Ignatius to dance, and Liz demands that they limbo. Ignatius excuses anger the trio, and they tackle him backward onto a guest. Fellow partygoers huddle fearfully in the corners, begging Dorian to get rid of Ignatius. Dorian gives in, feeling betrayed by Ignatius, and the ladies' auxiliary ushers him through the door and onto the sidewalk. Ignatius begins loudly dissociating himself politically from such distempered people, but is cut short when Frida offers him a 10-minute head start before they begin stalking him. Betty observes they have not had a fight in a while and are ready for one. The door slams as Ignatius waddles back and forth in fury, lamenting he has nothing to report to Myrna, a second debacle. Fortuna is a vicious slut. Unable to face his mother, Ignatius sets off for the night of joy. Miss O'Hara's photograph restores his hopes of confounding Myrna. The night may yet be rescued. A man in silk suit, a man in silk suit, a man in silk suit, and Homburg follows Ignatius undetected. He has been watching Dorian's building. Outside the bar, Ignatius finds Jones hawking Harla O'Hora and her plantation act. Everyone will catch the clap off the glasses, he guarantees. Opening night might be people's only chance to catch this act. No one enters the premises. Jones is happy to admit Ignatius to a ringside table and assures him the Nazi is in California. Only a few old men are scattered around the room. Ignatius looks forward to whispering comments about Boethius to get Miss O'Hara's attention. The bartender ignores Ignatius, but a Latin barmaid comes over. They have only champagne at $24 a bottle. Ignatius demands to be left alone, and a weak fanfare sounds before she can complete her threats. Ignatius wants to flee when Lana appears to introduce the act. Darlene sweeps on stage in a ball gown and immediately flubs her only line. Ignatius cannot remain silent at such a performance. The cockatoo spots Ignatius's earring and dashes, squawking towards Ignatius's head. Darlene points out the crazy man. Ignatius runs for the street, the bird digging claws into his shoulder and snagging the earring with its beak. Bottles and glasses shatter in his wake. Lana orders the band to stop and somebody to fetch Jones. Darlene laments opening night is ruined. Ignatius threatens lawsuits and the barmaid demands her $24 immediately. Ignatius stumbles past Jones and is nearly struck by an oncoming bus. He faints, staring into its headlights, saved only by Jones pulling him backward rather than letting him topple forward. As a crowd forms, the man in the Homburg steps forward and orders people to give Ignatius some air. Jones thinks back to a different disguise and recognizes Mancuso. Lana fires Darlene, Jones, and the Latina. The crowd ignores Lana's invitation to a new and classy night of joy, finding greater interest in the great white mound in the street. The Homburg asks politely to use the phone to call an ambulance, and Lana, hoping yet to make a profit on the evening, wonders what high-paying profession this soft touch of a man might be in. Ignatius dreams feverishly about Myrna's being tried in the court of taste and decency and given a dreadful sentence. Lana slips a Boethian photograph to the Homburg, suggesting they spend the night together. Mancuso identifies himself as an undercover officer and arrests Lana for solicitation and possession of pornography. Just then, Frida, Betty, and Liz find Ignatius as threatened. Chapter 13. Ignatius awakens, confused, in a hospital. His aching head bandaged and his mother grousing in his ear. How will she face people after this? Ignatius looks at the newspaper Irene throws at him. Wild incident on Bourbon Street. Headlines and 3 accompanying photographs. Darlene in ball gown with cockatoo. Lana Lee being loaded into a squad car beside 3 tough-looking, closely cropped women with Mancuso proudly holding the door for them, and a dope Negro grinning at a dead cow in the street. Ignatius criticizes the staff photographer's ineptitude. What, Irene demands, will the neighbors think about her son being mixed up with brawls, dirty pictures, and ladies of the evening? She refuses to listen to Ignatius' ramblings and forces him to read the text, which names him as a participant. Irene sniffles about calling Santa to alert Mancuso to Ignatius' suspicious dress and activities, which sent him to the St. Peter's address that Irene heard Ignatius give to the taxi driver. Ignatius fulminates against the bus driver and the medical profession, but Irene is finished listening to his stupidities. Ignatius is blaming everything on Myrna, Irene declares, is pure insanity. Myrna is not even in town. Ignatius has no compassion for Irene's sufferings that evening and takes the return of his, the consolation of philosophy, tome as proof Mancuso is his nemesis. Subhumans have conspired against him, and Fortuna has wantonly abandoned him. Irene orders Ignatius to shut up. The hospital wants $20 before it will discharge him, and his trumpet payment is due tomorrow. Then there is the man whose building she hit. Ignatius rails against highway robbery and is content to spend more time in this peaceful hospital. He demands pencils and paper from his room quickly so he can record his traumas while the memory is fresh. Irene orders him out of bed immediately. Claude is on his way to pay the bill. Ignatius demands to know who Claude is and forbids his paying his bill. Ignatius will remain in bed until honest money buys his freedom. By now, Irene is too angry to respond to Ignatius' criticism of her attire. Seeing the paper, Clyde fires Ignatius. An ape like him could destroy 10 years' work at building a decent commercial name. He doubts he will get the uniform back. What a family! Seeing the newspaper, Dr. Toole stops smiling as he realizes calling a weenie vendor before the faculty as a witness will be fruitless. Toole has been the butt of campus humor since the note about his underdeveloped testicle began to spread, and he figured that finding Ignatius and forcing him to confess to writing the note would end the calumny. He was convinced the faculty would understand just looking at that mound of flesh. Toole had been recalling the horrible semester he endured teaching Ignatius and his anarchist girlfriend and sipping a remedy for last night's intoxication when he saw the story. Revealing Ignatius now will only serve to make Toole look like a clown. Toole will just have to live with the jokes. Seeing the morning paper, Annie turns red and vows to rally the neighbors to sign a petition to rid themselves of the Reillys. Holding the newspaper up before his chest with pride, Mancuso poses for yet another snapshot. He wants plenty of pictures for his children to show to their friends. The sergeant is amazed Mancuso has turned out to be a hero. Mancuso reveals Jones tipped him where to look under the bar for the postcards. Still, it was a one-man raid, and Mancuso will probably be promoted. Holding the newspaper up before her mother's photograph, Santa brags about her grandson Angelo, and then grieves for the mother of the washed-up whale. Santa hopes Irene will put the boy away and marry. Santa assures her mother she is praying for her. Seeing the newspaper, Claude wonders how Ignatius could disgrace his fine, sweet mother. Santa is right. Ignatius must get treatment. This time, he spent only $20. But how much the next time? One cannot afford a stepson like that. Or the disgrace. George pastes the article into his junior achievement scrapbook. His mother is happy he is showing an interest in school, but George is figuring it is time to go visit his uncle on the coast. When the police arrive at the door, that plan collapses. Lana shreds the newspaper until the prison matron orders her to stop and clean it up. The ladies' auxiliary, occupying the same cell, orders the matron to leave. They like paper on the floor. Lana screams to get away from them. They demand to see the pictures Lana is hiding in her bra and fall upon her simultaneously. Dorian puts the ladies' auxiliary's apartment up for rent, figuring they will be gone a long time as two-time offenders. Had they been more sociable, someone might have warned them about who Mancuso was before they attacked him. Too bad also that Dorian is losing his protection. Still, that was a marvelous party. Ignatius must be heartbroken by the publicity. Pleased with the publicity, Darlene cut her picture out of the paper and thinks about how Jones had put them all out of business. She feels sorry for that crazy big man's mama. As she ponders finding a job, the phone rings with an offer from a club owner who has read about her, Jones spreads the newspaper out on the bar of Maddie's Ramble Inn, remarking to Watson how his idea of sabotaging the night of joy has turned him into a vagrant again. The fat freak set off a nuclear reaction that looked like a Western movie, a gang rumble, and a football game. It turns out Lana has no pals in the precinct, and some of her orphans are maybe being hauled in as well. Jones is the most famous vagrant in society and has asked Mancuso to get his colleagues to lay off him. He fears ending up in Angola with Lana. Lana was right all along. The fat freak ruins everyone's lives. Jones feels he deserves a vacation. There are too many black men looking for jobs. Darlene is sure to have a hard time too. Jones is sorry his sabotage exploded in her face, but he could not resist using Ignatius to blow up the night of joy. Watson observes, Jones is lucky he was not hauled in with everyone else, and Jones explains that Mancuso was grateful for pointing out the pictures of Lena beneath the bar, pictures that would help Mancuso get ahead. Jones, however, has gone from broom expert to vagrant. Jones agrees philosophically with Watson. Things can always be worse. He could be that fat mother, and wonders what will happen with Ignatius. After a sleepless night, Gus Levy reads the paper. He and Mrs. Levy had driven to Mandeville to visit Ignatius, but were rudely turned away. Mrs. Levy is not particularly concerned because she hopes deviously that Abelman will win the libel suit and ruin her husband in their daughter's eyes. Gus has canceled his spring practice reservations. He muses about things he should have done, renamed the company because the very sound of Levy pants gives him indigestion, and remove Gonzalez from the thankless, low-paying job he loves. Although that would probably drive the office manager to suicide, no one seems to want to buy the business. Gus recalls wanting the name changed to Levy Trousers since childhood, but was thrust aside by his father. Gus tells his wife he has found Ignatius in the newspaper. She admires Ignatius's cleverness in sending them to Mandeville like stooges. Seeing the young idealist in the photo as a bloated derelict, she declares Ignatius another of Gus' victims. Soon, Gus will be pushing a wagon. She has her mother's money to fall back on. She mocks her husband and declares the Leon Levy Foundation must go forward and reward people having the courage and bravery of the founder, bravery of the founder. She will not let Leon's name be dragged down, but Gus deserves his sorry fate. Gus realizes from this diatribe his wife needs him to lose the suit and be totally ruined for her to justify herself. The young idealist is too clever, Mrs. Levy taunts, for Gus to pin down. Mrs. Levy demands to hitch a ride as far as Trixie's apartment. Trixie's old hostility toward the company is back, and she must receive attention. Gus vows to himself that if Abelman's suit fails, he will give the company a little supervision. Mrs. Levy heaves herself out of the bucket seat outside Trixie's apartment building, taking along the cookies intended for Mandeville. Gus speeds off and pulls up at the Reilly's address. He hears a phone ringing indoors. Annie yells over that no one is home. Ignatius ought to be in an asylum. He lives with his mother, who is probably gone to get him out of the hospital. Ignatius has destroyed both women's nerves. He was precious as a kid, but look at him now, lying in the gutter. He and his mother fight all the time now. Annie is suspicious of Gus' questions until Gus explains Ignatius used to work for him. He asks whether Ignatius has a police record, and Annie reveals his mother is seeing an undercover officer. Irene likes to drink. Ignatius was okay until his dog died. That is when the fighting began. When Ignatius left the Catholic Church and put on a funeral of his own, wearing a Superman cape and burning candles in front of a dozen kids, his mother had to sell her piano to keep Ignatius in college for 10 years, and she nearly went broke. Ignatius picked up some girl in college, and they put on hootenannies every night in his room. Then the girl left, and Annie cannot blame her. Gus is depressed hearing the story, but Annie is happy to have an audience. She says she is going to have the police put Ignatius under a peace bond. Annie abruptly ends the story and disappears. Gus turns to see Ignatius and Irene arrive, fighting over the affair she is having with a degenerate old fascist and her conspiring with that police officer from before the encounter outside D. H. Holmes. Irene orders Ignatius out of the car. To Gus, Irene looks like a floozy. Irene falls on her knees to ask God what she has done wrong. Ignatius demands Irene get off Rex's grave and denounces how her friends are scheming viciously against him. Irene tries to explain her relationship with Claude, whom she would happily marry if he asks. Then she will not have to worry about money. They found nearly $30 in Ignatius' clothes at the hospital, and withholding that from his poor mother is the last straw. Ignatius is just plain mean. Ignatius forecasts a life of degradation for Irene if she remains with Claude, and she draws herself up tired, disgusted, and uninterested in his views. She is tired of being kicked around by a son who learned all there is to learn except how to be a human being. Claude might be dumb, but he is her only chance at dying halfway decently. Irene tells Ignatius to go to hell for breaking her heart so often. Ignatius bars Claude from his home and invokes his late father's memory. As a new fight looms, Gus steps in to introduce himself to Irene, and he asks to speak privately with Ignatius. Irene demands he talk to Gus. Ignatius examines the two letters and maintains he could not have written the letter because Gonzalez allows no one to use the typewriter. Irene is sure Ignatius is guilty and demands he tell the truth before she hits him in his bandaged head. Ignatius is saved by a phone call. Irene glares at him as she protests to the caller that she, Ignatius' mother, is sober. She promises to return the costume, again maintains she is not drunk, and slams down the phone. "You're fired," she says, and Ignatius is relieved. Mother and son fall to fighting over another lost job, and Irene strikes Ignatius when he blocks her from reading Levy's letters. Gus is convinced Ignatius is a victim of abuse and is sorry to have fired him. Ignatius grabs Gus's lapels histrionically, begs for help, and suggests Trixie is the culprit. He leads Gus into his room, leaving Irene shouting that Ignatius should not be believed. Gus is nauseated by the smell but dares not open the window because Annie is staring at him. Ignatius produces notes he jotted while working at Levy Pants, visions of restoring Gus to belief in his company and suggesting Trixie resents the firm. Trixie wants only to retire and knows a great deal. Snatching back his evidence, Ignatius advises Gus to penetrate her false senility. Gus doubts Trixie could write such a letter, but he admits that she hates the company enough to break it. Ignatius, by contrast, loves it. Claustrophobia torments Gus, and he squeezes out and drives away with Irene's voice ringing out against Ignatius. Irene declares forgery a federal offense, and Ignatius is in real trouble. Feeling ill, Ignatius blames it all on Irene's forcing him take a job. Gus drives to Trixie's, certain his wife is behind the lawsuit. Trixie's apartment is a sea of debris through which a narrow aisle has been cleared to the window, where the old lady is gorging on cookies. Trixie has discarded all improvements except the gleaming teeth. Gus demands to know whether Trixie wrote the letter. Mrs. Levy gloats that the idealist has fooled him again. Trixie examines the letter and declares they are in trouble now. Mr. Reilly claims she wrote it. Who, Trixie demands, is Reilly? A description of the fat man in a green cap clarifies Gus means her true blue friend, Gloria Reilly. If Gloria says Trixie wrote the letter, it must be true. Levy Pants deserves trouble, and Trixie hopes they lose everything. Mrs. Levy turns on Trixie as a viper in her bosom. Gus steps between the screaming women, gloating over Susan and Sandra's reaction to news of their mother torturing an old lady. Gus gloats about the harebrained project of renovating Trixie that will bring about the downfall of Levy Pants. Mrs. Levy demands that Gus see Lenny's doctor immediately. Gus, for once, agrees. The doctor can declare Trixie senile and incompetent. Gus comforts Trixie. and promises that she can retire with a raise in exchange for a signed confession. Trixie agrees with elation and thankfulness toward her smart friend Gloria. Trixie will say anything they want. Mrs. Levy is bitter because her husband thinks he has something on her. Gus plans to shift production to Bermuda shorts that will actually sell and will rename Levy pants as Levy shorts. They argue about Gus's ability to run any business. What will happen to Mrs. Levy and the girls when he fails? What about the foundation? Gus picks up a newspaper and points to the picture of Jones standing over the fallen idealist. The foundation will go forward, and Jones will receive the first award for meritorious service and bravery. It will be good public relations and improve factory morale. Mrs. Levy questions Gus's sudden idealism. This is not spite, Gus replies. Finally, he is doing something constructive. Gus orders his wife down the street to phone Lenny's doctor. Gus will call Jones personally. Trixie demands her Easter ham, as long as Mrs. Levy is going to the store. It is her condition for signing a confession. Levy gives his wife $10 and sends her on her grumbling way. Gus' mind is calm for the first time in days. Visiting the crazy Reilly household has convinced him that Ignatius wrote the letter. The kooky language matches. Still, it is best for Trixie to be framed. Everyone will be saved. Jones, whoever he is, deserves a generous award. Gus will offer him a good job at Levy Shorts, even better for public relations. Gus watches a freighter sail out to sea and imagines his wife sailing soon to San John. She will not fit into the Levy Shorts plan. Chapter 14. Ignatius has spent the afternoon napping, masturbating, and ignoring the phone. He fears Gus Levy. Ignatius is avoiding his mother, who is busy lamenting the family's ruin. Gus is too petty a person to withstand a trial. What might Trixie be babbling in Gus's ear? Ignatius feels like a condemned prisoner. Abelman will surely demand his life when it is proved Ignatius forged the letter. Filled painfully with gas, Ignatius reviews all the characters who have connived to cause his downfall, focusing on Myrna, whom he vows to stalk for life in search of vengeance, and his traitorous mother, who is contemplating marriage. Claude will doubtlessly testify to get his future stepson locked away. Doubtlessly, too, Irene will end up a penniless prostitute. Irene is also thinking about the letter and Ignatius's landing in jail. She listens outside his door to the squeaking and belching, but does not want to see his face. For the fourth time today, she calls Santa. Ignatius has to be committed, Irene admits, but they cannot talk about this by phone. Claude told Santa about the scene Ignatius made at the hospital and is now afraid of him. Santa claims Claude suggests he and Santa move in for Irene's protection, but Irene refuses. She wants Ignatius declared temporarily insane, like on TV, for his own good. He is in trouble at Levy Pants. Irene is too nervous to be home when the charity people come for Ignatius. Santa agrees. It will be like netting a wild elephant. Santa offers to call the charity immediately. Irene and Claude should meet at her house. Claude will be happy to hear this news. They will be married soon, and Irene will be well provided for. Irene likes the sound of this, but is still concerned about the fixation on communism. That will go away, Santa is sure, once they are busy together. Claude will want to turn Ignatius's room into a den, and that will turn Annie green. Irene is glad it is dark, so the neighbors will not see Ignatius dragged away. She dresses hurriedly and reaches the door, but cannot leave without saying goodbye to her child. Ignatius ignores her knocking and pleads for a goodbye kiss. Eventually, he gives in, and the sight of his bandaged head brings tears to Irene's eyes. She is sorry. It has to end this way. Ignatius grows suspicious of this sudden pleasantness. Irene admits Ignatius is incapable of working. He should stay indoors and not answer the phone. Ignatius has heard her whispering on the phone and is afraid. Mama is fixing things with Mr. Levi. She has his welfare at heart. Irene begs Ignatius not to be mad at her, embraces and kisses him, and then flees, apologizing for running into that building. Ignatius thunders at the fleeing car to come back. Ignatius is certain his mother has a clumsy plan up her sleeve. He phones Santa and demands to speak with his mother. Santa denies talking with her today, which confirms Ignatius' fears. Only a plot can explain the emotional farewell. They must be plotting to commit him to psychiatric tortures in the charity. Ignatius prefers jail, where one is limited only physically. Cursing wretched Fortuna, Ignatius waddles around the house like a sitting duck while Mother bowls, and a barred truck speeds towards him, a clay pigeon. Ignatius realizes he must move fast. It is 8 p.m., his $30 is gone, and he finds only $60 in his bed. Limiting him to hiding out in the Prytania, Myrna, rather than health workers, knocks at the door. Pulling her indoors, Ignatius declares he has been through hell, asks why Myrna left his life, and kisses her pigtail vigorously. They must flee to Manhattan, where he will flower, as she always says, or to a motel, as she always says, or to a motel to release his natural impulses. Has she any money? Myrna wants to rest from her 36-hour drive. Ignatius admits his telegram was horrible and deranged, but they must leave immediately. Ignatius's desperation does not register, and he is forced to narrate all that has been transpiring. He confesses to sublimating through food and renews his plea to escape a house so full of bad associations. Myrna's interest revives, and she announces they must get him packed. Ignatius cares only about his writings to keep them out of fascist hands. The journal has commercial potential. Myrna recalls good times spent in his room, composing anti-talc manifestos and babbles about how happy her therapy group will be to see him. Ignatius cannot wait to see New York, but fears if they do not leave instantly, Mother will return with her mom. Ignatius declines to leave a bitter note. Myrna rejoices to be saving someone. Myrna and Ignatius load her Renault, and Ignatius climbs into the back seat, determined not to sit in the deadly front seat. He is frantic that she start the car, and Myrna grows vexed. Ignatius demands they drive straight through, despite Myrna's exhaustion. They must avoid Mandeville, where psychiatrists must be on alert. Every route Myrna suggests holds lethal dangers. When Annie demands where the two beatniks are going, Ignatius's valve slams shut. Myrna realizes Ignatius is his same old self and fears she is making a mistake. A charity ambulance passes the Renault as they drive away. Fortuna has saved Ignatius. Myrna makes her way through city traffic and onto US. 11. Where Purgative Sea air opens Ignatius's valve and relieves his headache. Ignatius kisses Myrna's pigtail.